maybe, but have you ever felt like you've been sold? Someone's trying to sell you some kind of system that works, some kind of all-encompassing system that fixes a whole thing. Like there's real estate systems out there, isn't there, that you can jump into, and you're going to be able to get to a place where your passive income is bigger than your regular income in no time, apparently, if you just buy into this system. Or there's ways to beat the markets, and if you buy into the system, or if you buy now, you can lock in and create some kind of passive income. And Jesus talks to a man in John chapter 5 who has bought into a system that he can't seem to get out of. And so we're going to read some verses, and we'll just kind of read it bit by bit. So you might need to keep your Bible or your phone out this morning and just kind of work your way through these verses with me. In John chapter 5, it starts out by saying this: "Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals." So like when the Jewish festivals were on, the whole of Jerusalem would be swamped with people because all the Jews needed to come to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles or Passover or Pentecost. It was just part of their tradition. The whole place was filled with people, and Jesus had gone up to Jerusalem for one of the festivals. Verse 2 says, "Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed." This place he's talking about, this pool of Bethesda, it's an actual place. The remains of it are still there. I've been there. I've seen the 5 covered colonnades. One of these days we'll do an Anthem Israel-Palestine trip, okay? And if any of you are like, "Ooh, I'd want to do that," let me know. Maybe we'll plan it for next year or something like that. But this is an actual place. The teachings and the life of Jesus very much rooted in a specific place in history and specific zip codes. This isn't just fairy tales or fables that we're reading. And it says that, and there's a reason why, as it said, a great number of people used to lie there, the blind, the lame, and paralyzed. And if you look in your Bible right now, you'll see that it goes from John chapter 5, verse 3 to John chapter 5, verse 5. And in most cases, there is no verse 4. And this is just kind of a rare spot, 1 or 2 places in the Bible where that happens. But I kind of got a bit of inside information, and I do know what verse 4 says. And in fact, if you have one of those Bibles with notes on it, or if you can click on that in your Bible, you might find that as well. Because in verse 4, that is not actually in the text, says this. And it's not on your screen. It says, "And they waited for the moving of the waters in this pool of Bethesda." And it says in verse 4, "From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. And the first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they had." Now, if you're wondering, well, then that sounds great. Why wasn't that verse actually in the Bibles? And it's a little curious, isn't it? Was this actually supposed to be there and got left out, or is it, what's the reason? And I mean, there's some disagreement between people who think about the scriptures at a high level about what they think the reason is why that verse isn't in everybody's Bibles, why that story about what was happening at the waters of the pool of Bethesda was happening. Some people think that maybe John's initial audience for the gospel that he wrote would have actually known what that story was. They would have known what the pool of Bethesda was, and they would have known that the angel of the Lord apparently comes to stir up the waters and heal somebody it says from time to time. It was probably every time there was a Jewish festival. It was like 2 or 3 times a year that happened. Some people think that John's gospel, because it was written to people who would have known that story, he kind of left that information out, and then as the gospel of John and the information that he shared through that gospel got spread around the world, they thought, well, hang on a minute, we better add this in so it's clear to people what he's talking about. I mean, the heart of it is actually mentioned again in John 5 verse 7, but it might have been that it was just added just to make it absolutely clear to people who didn't know that there was this legend, or this, we don't know whether it was really happening, whether it was a legend, whether it was a myth, or whether genuinely the angel of the Lord was coming down and stirring up the waters and healing one individual person each time. Other people believe that, yes, there was specific healings going on. I mean, there are random and unusual healings that take place all throughout the Bible. In the Old Testament, the prophet, this man Naaman, was told, go dip in the Jordan 7 times and you'll be healed. Another person was healed by touching the bones of a dead prophet. You know, in the New Testament, people were healed because they touched the shadow of Peter or the other apostles, or they were healed because the apostles couldn't get to them, but they're like, well, if I lay my hands on my handkerchief and pray over that, and then maybe send my handkerchief to somebody else, they'll be healed, assuming they haven't previously blown their nose on their handkerchief, and they might not be healed. Okay, but so we won't get into that, but I guess we just did. But anyway, unusual stuff happened in the Bible. There were unusual healings, and so it perhaps could have happened, but it might not have happened. Do you want to know the truth of what the actual answer is? I don't know, but I think that it's kind of left vague there. But the point is that people thought that they were going to get healed. Enough disabled and sick people thought that if they could just get to the pool of Bethesda, probably at these festival times, from time to time, the angel of the Lord would come and would stir up the waters, and they put their trust in this system of healthcare for years. So people were putting their hope in getting to the pool of Bethesda at the right occasion so that they could be met with it, so they might just get a chance of getting healed. And along comes Jesus, and he just turns this tradition on its head a little bit and says, well, we're just going to change things up a little. In verse 5, it says, one who had been there was an invalid for 38 years. It doesn't say he'd been there for 38 years, but there was one who was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? He's been sick for 38 years. He's been coming back to the pool of Bethesda over and over again because this is his plan for healing. From time to time, the pool was packed. Hundreds of people, it's suggested, would have been there waiting for the waters to get stirred so that one person could get healed. And when Jesus asked this question, do you want to get well? You'd think there'd be an absolute yes answer coming from the man, right? But he doesn't actually answer like yes, he doesn't even answer no. He goes straight to the difficulties of the system that he's locked into. It says, when Jesus answers, do you want to get well? He says in verse 7, Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else always goes down ahead of me. You see, he's come over and over again to this weird and sort of quirky environment that all the sick people in the area have bought into. Maybe there's a chance it could get me healed. And it's also some kind of a pretty competitive environment as well, right? If only one person out of everybody who's there, there's going to be some pushing and shoving. Like whatever you think about whether it happened or whether it was a myth or a legend, like this was a place of false hope, wasn't it? This was a place that people were putting their hope in that they shouldn't have been. Imagine the isolation. Imagine that no one understood. Imagine the depression you would feel when you're just like, again, trying with this thing, like it's a doctor who has no interest in you, trying so hard to get ahead of the crowd. Think about the loneliness. You're surrounded by a crowd of people, but they're all looking out for number one, aren't they, in that situation? They're all trying to think about themselves because only one person can get to the waters and be healed. And everybody was feeling this sense of isolation and loneliness in the midst of hundreds of people trying to do the same thing. Let me ask you about your experience yesterday, or especially in the last couple of weeks. We all have this very deeply shared experience this last couple of weeks that can be described in one word: shoveling. Right? Like we were all like, you think about that, oh yeah. What's been your experience in the past 2 weeks with shoveling? You see, we had teenage children at home and they've all took off now, but like because of that, I thought this is going to be a time when we're going to come together. The Harfields are going to be a community when there's snow, so I bought 5 shovels, and I thought this is the way to make everybody share the load and serve one another and be in this together. 5 shovels will solve my problem. How successful do you think I was at executing that plan? Right? Not so great. Like shoveling snow is just one of those lonely and tedious, isolating jobs, isn't it? Like 5 shovels or not, it's always in my house a pretty lonely task. Backbreaking at times, and you're on your own. By the way, if you need a shovel, I have 4 spares. Okay, but my daughter lives down in the city, and I've never lived down there, but I've just seen a little bit of the results this past week. Where, like, if the snowplow goes down the middle of one of those streets and there's parallel parking only all the way down, what does it do? It just shoves all the snow between the spaces, between the cars. And you'll know if you've lived in a city before like that, where there's only parallel parking, that you've got to dig out your own car just from its space. And there's, like, snow on the hood and behind the trunk at, like, 4 or 5 feet high that you've got to dig out just to get your car out of its own little space. So what do? People get a little like territorial down there, don't they? And they'll dig out of their space, and then as the day goes on and everyone's gone to work, you'll see that there's a few cars left and there's a few spaces that have been dug out. But people have put things like armchairs in the space where their car was, and I saw a broken water dispenser and an ironing board because people are it becomes a competitive environment, right? No one's taking my space. I've got this thing I have to deal with, and I'm gonna get this space at the end of the day, and it becomes extremely competitive. And our pain, our isolation, our loneliness, when there's people around us who are fighting to kind of get ahead, can lead us almost to a place where we're trying to compete. We're looking and seeing, well, this person's getting their results, and this person's getting their prayers answered, and they're getting their healing. Can lead to some jealousy. Why is that person getting healed and not me? Why is that person getting their prayer answered and not mine? And there's sick people everywhere, and Jesus surveys the crowd and goes to one man. Is Jesus continuing this weird thing where just one person gets the result out of all the people there? No, I think Jesus wants to teach that, through the generations till now, wants to teach us something. Says to this man, do you want to get well? And his result isn't yes, of course. It's not no, but it's I'm stuck in this system. I'm stuck in this loop where it doesn't seem that I can get any answers. I've been sick for 38 years. I don't know how to get God's ear. There's a lot about healing that we can understand. There's things about healing that we don't understand as well. God's asked us to pray for the sick, and the prayer of the righteous man will make the sick person well. And sometimes God miraculously heals, and sometimes he doesn't, or sometimes it happens in other ways. And so we keep believing God, and even in the midst of some doubts. But this man looks at the waters, wonders if they're going to stir that day. But he's probably realizing after 38 tries of coming back, this is probably not my day. And the words come to him again, do you want to get well? Sometimes we can even get comfortable in our pain, and we just end up work through it, and we don't even believe anymore there's a way out of it. I'll read that verse 7 again. He said, "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water gets stirred. While I'm trying, someone else always goes down ahead of me. It's impossible. I'll never be healed. I'm going to stay here. I feel hopeless. Nothing good's going to happen." He has this he sort of has the solution figured out. The solution is, I've just got to keep living within this plan, and there's no way out. And Jesus comes along and says, what you think your need is not your need. You don't need this system that's here. We get our solutions in our head, and we get our ways that God is going to meet our need in our head, and we basically are telling God how he's got to do his job, right? I know I'm pretty good at that. I mean, like, that's one of my favorite things to do, is to let God know how he should solve a problem, you know? And God's saying to this man, I have a solution, and it's nothing to do with you running, which you can't do, and going swimming, which you also can't do, right? It's nothing to do with those things. And so often, like a guy like him could be looking around and think, like, everybody else is able to achieve what they want to achieve except me. Like, and we realize sometimes I can't bootstrap this anymore. I can't pull myself up from my bootstraps. I don't even know what that means, but I can't find a way to fix my own problem. I'm not as great. I'm not as strong. I feel weak. Have any of you watched in the last 40, 50 days the journey of Taryn Smith? She is a 25-year-old girl from Nebraska, and about a month and a half ago, and I've been watching her reels every day on Instagram for the last 45 days until she just completed, but she just rowed single-handedly or on her own across the Atlantic from the coast of Spain to Antigua, I think. Like, this girl's just, and every morning she's like putting a new reel up. Well, I rode 60 miles today, and then the next day I see another, another reel of how she felt and how it's going. And in 44 days, she rode across the Atlantic on her own, 3,000 miles. And as I'm watching this stuff, I'm like, man, my shoulders hurt just watching this reel. You know, the thought that, like, it doesn't make me feel better to find somebody who's just at, like, superhero levels. And don't you feel sometimes like everybody else is able to accomplish great things, and you're kind of left down here, and you're like, man, I can bench press pounds. And, like the thought of, this was the first thing I'd see in the morning, is somebody who's just rode, like, 60 miles in a day. I'm like, I gotta stop this. This isn't helping me, you know? And it's very easy to think that everybody else can move from inability to ability. Everybody else can move from where they are to where they want to be. And Jesus gave this man an instruction that if it wasn't Jesus, might have been the most ridiculous thing that you could ever say to anybody. He says in verse 8, Jesus says to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. At once that man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Let's leave that verse up on the screen for a moment or two. And worship team, could I ask you to come up and prepare to close our service in a few moments with a song? Jesus says, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and he walked. And I want to ask this simple question today, a couple of questions of us. Like, what's your pool of Bethesda? What might be the place of false hope in your life that's taking the place of God? What system are you putting your hope in that Jesus wants to say, like, just forget that system, listen to me? Where could we be listening to Jesus rather than some kind of system that we've been going back to over and over? Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's something that something that keeps drawing us to itself, that we keep going back to. Maybe it's something that's left us in isolation that nobody else knows about. Is it time to stop submitting to the system and time to start coming to Jesus? We sung those words earlier from that song, The Lord Will Provide. Like, fantastic. You know, just a reminder. I know my God will provide. And that's it, isn't it? That's what we're called to do, is to remember that God provides, that He's our source. And I'll ask you this as well. Where can we move in our lives from excuse to obedience? This man didn't like have a yes answer. I want to get well. He had an excuse. He's like, well, I can't get healed because of this, because of this, because of this. This man didn't need the water to move. He just needed to move towards Jesus. And I wonder if today there's a new kind of submission to the words of Jesus, to the call of Jesus on our lives. He's calling us. He's saying, come to the altar. He's saying, will you bow the knee? Will you surrender? Not to Christianity. Do you ever hear about people that say, oh, I think I'm turning my life over to Christianity? That's not going to help. That sounds too much like a system, doesn't it? We turn our lives over to the person of Jesus. He's the one who's at the heart of all this. And I want to ask, is there a new kind of submission that's needed that you've never put into practice before, where you say, today, I'm not going to turn it over to an organization. I'm not going to turn it over to a system, but I want to turn it over to Jesus. I'm going to stop doing it my way and start doing it his way. Let's close for a moment in prayer. Father God, we thank you that it's not your desire ever to leave us trapped in our decades-long excuses. Lord, I thank you that you don't leave us sitting by pools of the past that give us a false hope. Lord, when you ask if we want to get well, I pray that we'll be done with responding with our whys and hows and why not. But Lord, make us people who are always looking to you for solutions, not looking to systems, not looking to legends, not looking to places of false hope, but looking to you. Should we stand together and sing as we worship this morning?